Welcome to the folks who joined us a little bit early. We're just waiting till a minute or so after the hour so people can switch from their prior meeting to this one, and we'll get started shortly. Welcome. Should probably test my voice before I start a webinar, but welcome everybody. I'm Brian O'Leary, the Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group and a member of the Green Book Alliance, founded in 2020 with Vic and Karina Urquhart and BookNet Canada with Noah Genner. Welcome to today's webinar. About a year ago, the Green Book Alliance published what we call our printer publisher checklist. It was a guide for sustainability conversations that occur between publishers and their manufacturing partners. And in the years since it was released, both publishers and printers have tested the checklist with some success and I think many suggestions. We're gathered today in this webinar to hear both about the things that kind of motivated the development of the checklist, particularly the challenges that manufacturers face, printers face in trying to deal with a variety of different requests from publishers around sustainability. We'll talk a little bit about the checklist itself, the best practices it outlines, and how it's currently being used. And then we'll hear from E.J. Hurst at New Society Publishers about ways that she's been trying to work with her manufacturing partners really for more than 2 decades to both surface and resolve issues around sustainability. We're really happy to have you here today. We're going to start with by hearing from Dirk Heiler, who's President of Operations at Lakeside Book Company, which you probably already know, is one of the largest book manufacturers in North America. They recently acquired Marquee Printing in Canada, and they've been active in both in North America and outside the country uh, for for more than a century in different in a small set of iterations. He's joined today by EJ Hurst, who's sales manager and sustainability specialist at Lakeside Book. And they're going to take a few minutes to kind of explain the perspective that they have on sustainability and how to foster good conversations between printers and their clients. So I'll start with you, Dirk. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, Brian, thanks for having Bryce and I here. Looking forward to having a discussion today. So Bryce, we'll go ahead to the next slide. I think what I'll start with is I'm going to give a little bit of a high level overview, and I'm going to let Bryce get into some specifics on sustainability and how we've been active in it, and what the relationship has been between Lakeside Book and many of the publishers. But just a little about Lakeside Book. We've got 22 sites. So about half of those are sites that that print product. The other half of those are sites that we'll say fulfill, so pick and pack product. Those are sites both in the US and in Canada. We have a large customer base, deal with a lot of the larger publishers, but also deal with a lot of publishers that produce 1 or 2 titles a year. So quite a variety of a customer base. And we've got a little bit over 5,500 employees at this point in time. The products that we produce, really, we're Lakeside Book, right? We're a book company, so that's what we produce is books. The trade business, the education business, we do B2B catalogs because those are usually larger, thicker, more like a book product. And then we also do products just for the general book market. We do both offset printing, your traditional web printing, and then we also have digital process, HP process that can produce the shorter counts. And we have both of those offerings in multiple sites. And then I guess I would start by getting a little bit into our sustainability journey. We really started in 2022. And what we did is we looked at it and said, hey, look, we know that this is going to be something that'll be out there in the future. We've had a lot of customers asking about it, and frankly, our owners, Atlas, Atlas Holdings, they asked us, what does your sustainability path look like? What does your ESG journey look like? How are you going to how are you going to basically get into that? So what we did is we started by benchmarking our organization against similar organizations. And really 2022 was a learning process. And then in 2023, we really started digging into our journey by taking some actions. And ultimately what it's culminating, and I think Bryce will mention this, one of the things it's culminating with is we're going to be doing our first sustainability report for 2023 in the next couple of months. So Bryce, we'll go to the next slide. Really, historically, when I think about our relationship with our customer base from a sustainability or basis, what I think about is really for many, many years, there were different certification processes, whether it was Costco or Disney or other certification processes we were involved. These were yearly requests that we would get. Sometimes it was for the same customer, you could use the same information. But there was, questions from HR policies to security. Sometimes there were on-site audits, but they were predictable and there weren't that many of them. Fast forward to the past couple of years, we've been getting more and more sustainability and the ESG based requests. Bryce will go into those in a little bit more detail in a moment. But I kind of think of this a little bit as the Wild West right now. Really, there's no standards. There's multiple databases that we use. Everybody's looking for different metrics, but the point is we're all working towards the same end goal. Really trying to make the environment better, the business world better. But there's multiple ways that people are getting there today. And kind of reminds me of many years ago when I think about file preparation for the print industry. lots of different types of files were sent in. Everybody had their own tool that they used, and we all had to adapt to it. But over time, what we did is we morphed and developed to that PDF standard that is really the standard today that the majority of, printers get from different publishers with their print files. So I kind of think of, sustainability and ESG, like those early days in file preparation. I think there's clearly an opportunity that's in front of us to streamline things, to simplify things, and to, for all of us to, I'll say, basically learn from each other. And I think that's really what this is about today, is we'll share where we are on our journey. It doesn't represent all printers, but it represents where we are. And I think we have a variety of customer bases, so that might be interesting for some folks. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Bryce, or let Bryce go ahead and start talking about, her role real quick, and then also the requests we've been getting and how we've approached them. Go ahead, Bryce.
Yeah, thank you, Dirk. So I've been with Lakeside Book Company for 5 years now. 2 of those years has been full-time, and then this year I was promoted to sustainability specialist. So now finally getting to focus a lot more time on these challenges that we're presented with. So the past 2 to 3 years, I've been dealing with the sustainability reporting at Lakeside Book, and we've been seeing these requests gradually increase over time. So in 2017, we had 8 total requests from 2 different customers, and that continued for 2 years. And then now in 2023, we have 29 requests that we've had. So that more than tripled in the span of 6 years. We expect a lot more in the future, since this is soon something that's probably going to be required by a lot of companies. The length of requests has also increased. So some of these requests, for example, the first couple that we had were maybe 10 to 15 different metrics that we were giving customers. Some of the requests are as little as 5 questions. They're just wondering about a general overview, wondering what our ESG statement is. But there's many of these requests that have been getting longer and longer, ask up to 300 plus questions. So we need time to figure out how we are going to answer those, need time to find that data that we don't already track. There are also certain requests that ask us to make commitments to reduce our emissions. So those are things we need to consider and measure versus our goals that we want to work towards ourselves, and consider all those other goals that we're being asked to look at. And we need to get a lot of different departments involved at Lakeside Book. So legal, HR, engineering, sales, marketing, sourcing, shipping, operations, environmental health and safety, as well as sustainability are all involved in these requests. So we are working towards standardizing this process, getting, the same people involved every time, so that these requests get to the proper people and it's not handed through a bunch of different hands before getting to who needs to answer these questions. So timing of requests is also not always ideal. Like I said, they don't always get to the proper people right away, resulting in shorter deadlines. Some requests don't offer enough time to begin with, and some requests offer or ask for different time periods and have different fiscal years. For example, we've had requests that ask for April to March data versus January to December. So then we are recalculating all of that data and coming up with different numbers for that year, and it's just something that takes time to do. The frequency of requests is also different between customers. Some are monthly, quarterly, or annual. So depending on that frequency, we're spending more time on those requests. And there's also a large diversity of questions, and a lot of these questions are just different ways of asking the same questions ultimately. And some of these reporting databases that are being used now, those are the types of ones that are asking the 300 plus questions. They also publicly grade performance. So if we don't cover all of those 300 questions, we are graded poorly compared to others, and that just doesn't look good for us because we don't have that data yet. So we are also, we are also being asked for different units of measurement. So for example, natural gas is most commonly in therms or decatherms, but we've also heard cubic feet, cubic meters. So that's just something that we have to go through, change units on everything, and it changes how everything is calculated. So that again takes more time. Paper usage and waste is also asked for in a variety of different ways. It can be tonnage, waste per book, square footage of paper. So again, different ways of asking for ultimately the same question. Different ways of providing that information include uploading documents, certifications. Some of them are open-ended questions that we either need to answer in a couple sentences, provide multiple choice, or just data entry entering those numbers. And there's also, again, different time periods, either monthly, quarterly, or annual for those reports. So to cover a couple of those unique question examples and requests, we have heard to list waste by type for products. For example, that'd be listing the amount of paper used, listing the water consumption, listing the landfill waste, all for those specific products. What types of ink that's being used, the amount of plastic wrap for books. We've been asked to weigh total paper grammage per page of book, including the front cover, back cover, insert, the envelope. So those specific requests per customer are custom, and we need to go out on the floor and get those measurements for them. Total weight of the book, types of packaging, our goals that we have, our commitments. We've been asked to provide total miles to each delivery site, employees' commute to work, our diversity statement, our board structure, stakeholder management, key performance indicators, and data protection and privacy. So those are just a few of the ones that we don't see very often. And it's maybe once a year, every couple of years that we get these types of questions. So it's something that we need to look into and take time to respond appropriately to all of these. Whereas some of the more common questions that we get asked and that we have ready to provide for customers are our ESG statement, our business ethics policy, our ISO certifications. We can easily provide the number of books, pages, or impressions for the customer, the electricity usage, natural gas usage, water, paper, non-hazardous waste, recycled materials, and hazardous waste are all readily available. So just know that we all want to work together. We want to work with you to be able to provide this information. We want to be able to provide the best quality solutions to bring books to life while taking care of our employees and customers, protecting the environment, and supporting our communities. We uphold this commitment by employing environmentally responsible business practices and endeavoring to serve our neighbors. So ultimately, we look to standardize the sustainability reporting process to improve the turnaround of our responses back to you, our customers. And we know that disclosing these efforts provides insight into how we intend to deliver on our commitment to sustainability efforts and report our progress back to you. So one of the things that we've been working on is our first ever sustainability report. We're working on an internal one that will be released to our employees in February, just because we were excited to get this out and wanted to get the information to them. And then we need to wait until a little later this year until we have all of our data collected from 2023 to release our annual. We're going to make this an annual report to the public on our website. So there you will be able to see all our efforts related to ESG. So that includes the environment, social, and governance aspects of our company. And so we want to provide that to you to be as transparent as possible and show you what we intend to do at Lakeside Book to better the environment.
Yeah, and Bryce, I appreciate you sharing that. I guess Brian, before I pass it over to you, I'll just sum it up by saying, I think you can tell we fully support this direction. We support, giving information and feeding information to the publishing community so that that you guys can pull together your reports. I think what we need to do is you can just see based on the types of questions we get, the diversity of questions, the number of increasing requests. We just got to find a way to make it, simplify it and make it manageable into the future, because as Bryce said, I think this is only going to grow. So Brian, we'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you, Dirk, and thank you, Bryce. I think that's a really good overview of the motivating problem, and at least part of the motivating problem that led us to develop the first checklist a year ago. And I'm just going to put in the chat a link to the summary of the checklist, but I'm also going to share it here with folks as I tell a little bit of the history. So very much as Bryce and Dirk described, we were hearing from the manufacturing community that there was questions asked, the same question asked in multiple ways, different requests for metrics and data, sometimes different questions asked in the same way that left manufacturers a little bit confused about how to best answer it. And of course, fairly lengthy and in some cases contradictory questionnaires from multiple sources. It was not just publishers. There were, as Bryce talked about, I think, a number of different companies and organizations that collect information, for example, on paper performance and the like, and they were kind of looking for information from a variety of different sources. So what we did was worked over the course of the better part of 2022 to develop a checklist, which you can download. It's also available on the site, and the details are under each question. But you see here at the top the major sections. So paper, printing, packaging, plastic, the 4 Ps, recycling, greenhouse gases, ESG, which is the shorthand for environmental, social, and governance questions, which are becoming increasingly prevalent in among publishers and manufacturers, as well as other trading partners. Shipping and transportation, which plays a significant role, particularly for certain types of fulfillment obligations, and then standards within, there and certifications that manufacturers might have pursued. That's a fairly broad list, and we wound up developing a set of several dozen questions. But our goal in it was really not to specify in it, and what we're hearing in some cases is that we might need to be more specific, but it was not to specify exactly how the answer should come in, but really to provide a framework for fostering a conversation between trading partners, publishers, and printers in this case, that would allow them to both make progress in meaningfully reducing their carbon footprint or their sustainability impact in the current environment. So this is kind of like a talking document more than it was a prescription for how we would go forward. It's had some uptake in the last year, and EJ Hurst, who's here today, I'll turn this over to in a moment, has tried using it and has had both some success and some struggles within it. But I'd like to stop here and say, if you want to know more, the link that we put in the chat is really helpful. But I'd love to hear, EJ, from you to hear from your perspective on, as a publisher that's been committed to sustainability from the outset, how you've been approaching this topic and where you see some good progress, as well as areas where we continue to need help and support.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Brian. I'm EJ Hurst. I'm the sales manager and head of sustainability at New Society Publishers. We're based on the Shnamut First Nations territory, which is unceded territory here in British Columbia, Canada, just on an island across from Vancouver. I have a background in environmental studies. I have a degree in environmental studies before I came over to publishing. So I have a little bit of a knowledge base to work on these sort of things from, which is good. New Society in 2002 started printing on 100% post-consumer recycled paper. And our printing partner in that was Friesen's Printing in Manitoba. And they have also been our partner in this journey and have been incredibly helpful. And that would be my first comment, is relationships with your printers. is key. I also want to say, wow, Lakeside, that's very impressive. What you've been doing and what you've been providing people already is incredible. And congratulations on your sustainability report. That's terrific. So we became carbon neutral in 2006. And we were able to do this through the work of one of our authors who built us a spreadsheet carbon calculating tool for publishing. We're voluntarily carbon neutral, so we didn't have any certifications to follow. We did it because we're a mission-driven publisher, and we were attempting to reduce our impact on the environment. In 2016, we became a registered B Corporation, and that was our introduction into the world of certification and documentation. And suddenly we realized that the world had caught up with us. And now there is all sorts of different certifications we might pursue. And that's what led us into we created a questionnaire for our printer for Friesens does most of our printing. So we started with them. And it was about 10 questions long, and it pretty much followed a lot of the same categories as the GBA questionnaire. And so I sent that over to our contact at Friesens and got back enough information that we were able to complete our carbon neutral report. But like you mentioned, it wasn't in the metrics we needed, but maybe because we're used to doing this on our own, we did the work of figuring out how to match their metrics to our metrics rather than asking the printer to do that. That was quite successful. We were able to get enough information for our initial carbon calculator. What we've discovered is that we need to update it. And we've recently received some funding, New Society Publishers with ECW Press in Toronto. We came together, we made a sustainable publisher group along with Noah Jenner from Green Book Alliance and BookNet Canada. And we got some funding to create two tools. One is a life cycle analysis tool for a print run, and the other is a carbon calculator for a business. And embarking on that, we've now realized the incredible complexity of getting paper data, of the wide range of paper data. So we used something called the Eco Data Paper Base, which is created by Canopy Planet in Canada. And we have some generic papers, so you could select a generic paper. But in the long run, what we think would be great would be if every paper was listed in this tool with its carbon emission beside it. And then you could just use a drop down, select the paper you're printing on, and it would calculate the carbon emission for you. When the Green Book Alliance questionnaire came out, I did send that also to Friesens. And what happened was I got, at the start of it, there was some more detailed questions, which petered off to one-word questions, which petered off to no answers at all within about 3 pages. So then that devolved into a phone conversation. What's the problem here? Why is this difficult to answer? And basically, it came down to so much depends on the customer. So they were used to, as you are used to, customizing the answer for every customer. And the scale of the job to put all of the information so that any customer's choice could be found by using one document was bigger than the time they had to work on one questionnaire for me. So I think that would be my biggest feedback from trying to use the questionnaire was I didn't get the impression they wanted to do it publisher by publisher. They preferred me to say, I use 100% post-consumer recycled paper. Can you tell me, what is the emissions for that? How many books did we print this year? And, go at it with really specific questions rather than trying to build something that would cover every question from every person. I also heard a bit about, different questions, same everything that you've said about the different people needing different approaches. So some of the challenges, it's easy to work with Friesens. They know us, we've worked together forever. To go to the flip side of the coin, we are distributed by Ingram in the United States. And we have been trying to get information about their print-on-demand programs, the Lightning source. That is completely opaque. And so the biggest challenges are finding the correct person to talk to. I sent my questionnaire to them. And when I felt as though, to be honest, I felt as though it got handed from person to person to person until it landed with someone who was possibly the summer intern. Because when it came back, the answers were, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. They were things like, is your company carbon neutral? Do you have any environmental standards? And so I think that the person who filled out the questionnaire was not the right person, and I didn't know how to reach the correct person. And I did speak to my contact and I said, do you understand that we're using this questionnaire to prepare a sustainability report that is a public facing report. I don't think you want me to use your responses. And since then, I haven't had, I still haven't got a correct person. I still don't have a way of getting the information. And so that would be, especially for a small publisher like us, I should have said we publish 12 to 20 books in a year. So we are a small independent Canadian publisher, and attempting to get information and just to find where to start asking your question can be really difficult. On top of that, I found the level of education was extremely low. So a lot of my conversations started at very low points where I would have to explain what is a carbon emission, not even what is scope 1, 2, 3. What, but like I was told, oh, our diesel trucks have emission control, so there's no carbon emission coming from diesel trucks. So I'm like, okay, let's start at the beginning. And so that piece also has been really challenging. And not being a priority. A lot of the times, some of this work I was trying to do during the pandemic, well, it's just about impossible to get anyone's attention on sustainability during the pandemic. I'm hoping now things are turning, especially with legislation. So with the advent of some of the legislations in the EU, I think things will become a higher priority for people.
Thanks, EJ. And just as an observation, that we are in the middle of doing some work to develop a checklist for conversations between publishers and distributors and retailers. And we'll certainly learn from both the printer and the publisher experience with the current checklist. But hopefully that'll be helpful in kind of moving the industry forward. There are gaps in people's understanding, and sometimes some folks are relatively recent to the conversation. So you don't want to penalize them, but we do need to help foster that conversation. I wanted to just mention we are open for questions. That we have one that's come in so far, and I'm sure there'll be some more. But if I could start with the first, and Dirk, this might actually be one that's useful for you, having recently gone through an acquisition of sorts. Somebody's asking, when looking at a prospective acquisition candidate, does the due diligence effort include a review of where they are managing and reporting on their sustainability efforts? And I think the answer is increasingly yes. You were asked this by Atlas, and I'm sure that you asked these questions of Marquis.
Yeah, more and more it's in the due diligence stage. I would say it's understanding where people are at in their journey, especially, as we go forward and we, have our sustainability report, we're going to want to make sure that, if there's further acquisitions that they tuck in properly with that information. So I would say more and more that we're starting to have those discussions.
Yeah, and I think it's under the heading of ESG, the environmental sustainability and governance piece. The governance is increasingly kind of, if you're doing any work in the European Union or Europe more generally, right, reporting becomes more important.
And I think in the future, if there's legislation that drives things into the future and creates more must-dos and more legal things, then it starts to become, more than just a due diligence conversation. It starts to become, okay, here's the checklist. Do you do this? Do you not do this? And that becomes part of the decision-making process.
Right. So maybe a kind of a basic question to kick us off. This is obviously a complex topic. There are a lot of moving parts. EJ, I'm sure you've learned a lot in the 20 years that New Society has been doing this work, and certainly even more as you became a B Corp. But I'm just kind of wondering how do you individually and how do your organizations keep up with what's happening in this part of the market? I mean, it sounds like a challenge even for a larger manufacturer. Maybe start with Bryce because it's kind of your day to day to keep up, and then Dirk and EJ if you want to weigh in.
Yeah. So like I said, I was promoted to sustainability specialist this year. So that's new. Have a little more time to work on sustainability. Before that, I was just part-time, but something that helped get me up to date on everything that was going on, even though I just went through college, got my degree in environmental studies. It's still always changing. So I was going to conferences. Those helped a lot with just understanding where everyone else was at as well with the sustainability reporting world. Continuing education through like the US Green Building Council has free education classes on what's going on. We have started up green teams at Lakeside Books. So those are going to help us to collaborate and work on more sustainability initiatives that we want to accomplish at Lakeside Book. And that's just more people thinking about those sustainability ideas and coming up with suggestions. So another thing I want to do is implement a sustainability suggestion program for employees to give us their input and their ideas, since they're the ones working on the floor and they know what's going on. They know how much waste they're producing during their process and everything. And then another thing that we are implementing this year is a database that's going to help us with our sustainability reporting process. So it can help us track our data better. We'll be able to add more metrics, and the time process will be a lot more efficient for getting back to our customers.
Dirk, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would say frankly and honestly, I rely on Bryce and some of her teams, to help keep me educated. But before that, when we first started, we went out, we found a consultant that we matched up, and that we had that consultant do an overall view of the company and then report out to our CEO, myself, our sales leaders, and really educate us. So we went out and got education, and then we realized, hey, this is big enough. We need somebody like Bryce to be involved.
And to some extent, you've been evangelizing on behalf of Lakeside. You and I have been on panels a couple of times together in different settings, and yeah, I think we get smarter just from the questions that we were asked in those settings. EJ, New Society is small but mighty, but it is small. So maybe from your perspective, how do you juggle? You have to get books out every day.
Yeah.
How do you juggle that with keeping up?
I would echo for anyone who can afford to do it. A position like Bryce's is the way to go. Because it's a ton of reading. There's the conferences to attend. We are fortunate in that, being a mission-driven company, all of the staff are educated and motivated and work towards the common goal. So that helps. We have a lot of the staff it's part of what they do. And so information flows between the staff. We do have something called our B team, which we put together to address our B Corp questionnaire. So that's a team of 4. But it's a lot of reading. Just keep it, newsletters, documents. We also connect with Jen at ECW and other publishing groups, sharing information between publishers, and between the printers too. We are regularly in content passing, the information that we've found back and forth. But it's demanding. It's hard to keep up. Things are changing, and yeah, I would highly recommend a full-time role if you can swing it.
Yeah, a couple of questions that have come in from the folks who are on the webinar. Mark is asking, and maybe I'll start with you, Dirk, on this. From the printer's perspective, it's clear that there's a need to respond to customers, but Do you see this as an opportunity to create either a benefit for customers or a differentiator among competitors in this space?
Yeah, I do see it as an opportunity for for folks to create a differentiator out there, but I also look and say, hey, this is all going to come together, and it's going to be, it's it's going to be, just an entree at the table for everyone at some point in time. I think right now it is a differentiator. And EJ, I guess I'll take the opportunity. I can empathize with what you talked about with Ingram, right? And not being able to figure out who to answer the question. And I guess I'll take this opportunity and kind of pitch our situation and what we had. I was at the receiving end of a lot of those questions. What would happen is our sales team didn't know where to go a few years ago. And so our sales team would call somebody and they'd say, well, that's not what my role is. I don't know that answer. They would call somebody else. And finally, what happened was, I remember very, very vividly on a Wednesday, a sales rep called me and said, hey, I need this filled out. And nobody's been able to do it. And it had languished in the company for 2 weeks. And I said, when's it due? They said Friday. Oh, geez, I'm never going through this again. And what we started with is hey, HR, sales, EHS, environmental operations, legal, we put a team together. And whenever we got a request, we would funnel that request to the team. And because they were different questions, we had to have multiple people. Ultimately, this grew into having Bryce drive this and do this. But to me, that's a benefit of having standardization, is part of the reason that it gets passed around within, I'll say, the print world, printers, is because they don't know how to answer the questions and nobody really owns that. But if you have a standardized document, it becomes much easier to own something that's standardized. So a little bit more, Brian, than what was asked, but I just wanted to toss that in there.
That's really helpful. And EJ, from your perspective, is it a differentiator? I mean, is it part of how you think about choosing a manufacturing partner?
Yeah, it's pretty much, I'd like to say it's our number one, and in good years it is. It's our number one decision making. Economics has come to play in it a little bit recently, where we've had to re-examine things, but yeah, definitely for us. Are you still, you're still muted, Brian?
Thank you. Sorry, I have a boisterous Airedale in the background. A related question that came in the Q&A from Pete, and Dirk, this will probably sound familiar to you. The question is, do publishers hold, for example, overseas printers or to the same standards as they do in the US? Are you looking for the same information? And I mean, and perhaps you alluded to this a moment ago, are you willing to pay more for printing due to the printer's sustainability efforts? And what's the balance there? I know you can't quite answer it as directly as it's asked, but I mean, how do you think about these topics?
Yeah, I guess I would ask Bryce, do you, in your experience, when you see questions come from, from overseas, do you see a difference between the types of questions we get from overseas companies or US companies?
I can't say that I've noticed a difference, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is, especially since Europe is a little more ahead of the game than us.
Yeah, I've seen, again, not being familiar with printers overseas and not talking to them about this, but I know that questions and topics that have come up from publishers over, in the UK, I know that they've looked at different things from an industry standpoint. There's some different products that they've looked at for example, for how they palletize, how they take cartons of books and palletize them. The types of products that they use are different than what we do in the US. So I know that there's things to learn from over there, but Brian, I'm not exactly sure how that differentiation is between printers.
Right. And EJ, from your perspective, I mean, I think the question is probably thinking, if you're going to source from China, do you ask the manufacturer in China the same questions and expect the same answers as you would from a US or a North American provider?
Yeah, we only print in North America. Well, that's not true, actually. We have printed a little bit in overseas. And yes, we would ask that and expect that, but whether we would receive it or not, I have heard for publishers printing in China that it is very difficult to get the same level of information. But I think it would be expected. Whether or not you would be able to accomplish it is another question. And there was also a price piece to that. Certainly, we've always been willing to pay more for sustainability and in printing. And I actually get a little, I mean, if we can do it and we're so small and, you know, it's like, it's possible. It's a matter of will. And yes, you have to rearrange what you spend your money on. You have to rearrange your priorities. You have to find the way to do it, but it's certainly possible, and certainly possible to be profitable at the same time.
Yeah. And you
Yeah.
can't really speak for all publishers, but that's kind of the new society perspective, is this is important to us and we make trade-offs.
Yeah.
This is, maybe if I stay with you on this next question. So because as a publisher representative, are you getting pushback on types of questions that you're asking, or is there an unwillingness to share certain types of information? Or do you feel? I'll stop there. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. For the work that we do as a publisher, no, not pushback in that, you know, the information is confidential or proprietary. It's more that it's just not available. It's not measured. It's difficult to, you know, it is measured, but it's measured in a different way. It's difficult to sort through the data and find out what you want. What we did find was a bit of concern when we were making the life cycle analysis tool, and that was for mills that do pulping and printing in the same location as opposed to a mill that just does paper. They were concerned that their carbon emissions would appear higher, and they wanted to be sure that any tool that was measuring carbon would include the pulping of the paper as well as the printing. Because if you're just a printer, if you're just making paper and not pulping paper, your emissions are lower from the mill. So that was one example where, you know, the particular company was concerned that they may come out looking as though they had higher carbon emissions, where in fact they just do more of the work.
Right. So there's nuance in the measurement that you have to make sure that you take into account.
Yeah, and not inadvertently disadvantage someone in the industry.
And the second part of that question, maybe for Dirk and Bryce, is, you know, is it a matter of a manufacturing partner learning how to measure the data, you know, or understanding what the request is?
Yeah, I would say, and I'll let Bryce chime in on how she views the questions that she gets, but we don't have any problem sharing the data. That's not the issue. The issue is, do you have the data, and what's the effort to get the data? Again, we have 22 sites. And when we get down to saying, okay, how many miles a day do your employees commute to work? It's like, okay, that's a little bit far. We could figure that out, absolutely. But if you think about the effort to do that, I'd rather stay on the core things. And so when we don't respond, it's not because we couldn't ultimately get there. It's just because, you know, the amount of time required for one single question just becomes, you know, unreasonable. Bryce, would you agree with that or anything else?
Yeah, I agree. It's great to see all these different types of questions and know what to consider to start tracking, but it's just a matter of starting to collect that data and have it ready to provide in a timely manner too. You know, some of that's going to take months and months to start to gather.
A question's come in the last couple of minutes. It's kind of looking toward us, but I think it overlaps with a question that we've already prepared ahead of time. I'll just read it. There are several different parallel work streams and competing parties seeking similar types of sustainability information, particularly from paper mills in the book space. I think everybody's familiar with them. Are there any 2024 efforts for some of these work streams to be aligned together and their standards for data to be similar? I'm not immediately aware, but maybe start with you, EJ. I mean, is this something that you're hearing something about, or is it an opportunity for us to deepen our engagement in this area as the Green Book Alliance?
Um, certainly the consultant who put together our life cycle analysis tool has created a tool to make that possible. In his vision, publishers would send that questionnaire into their printers. And I've said, can we discuss the process? Because having heard from you, Dirk, I was like, I think the last thing they want is every publisher sending in this questionnaire that they want it filled. Is there a broader way we can do that? So at this point, I've just got the question. Is there a broader way we can do this? And I think once it's completed, the goal is that this tool would be able to standardize everything and could be used by all publishers in Canada. But the process is of having each publisher send it in, I think, is not probably the correct way to go ahead.
Right. And Dirk, from your perspective, I mean, is there any movement to try and align these things?
I would say, yeah, there's been only two things that I've heard. One is, Brian, the group, the work that the Green Book Alliance has done. The other one is the BMI has talked about it. I don't get many calls from, our competitors, but this is an area where I've gotten calls. People have called me and said, how do you guys handle all these questionnaires that you get? So I think the BMI is looking at it and saying, look, maybe what we ought to do is we ought to come up with a standard and share that amongst our public, the printers. And then there could be this standard response. Now that may not give everybody what they want, but I think there's going to be a push at some point in time because it's an overwhelming effort for many folks who don't have a Bryce on staff, and not everybody's going to be able to afford to go get a Bryce on staff.
Yeah, and for the audience, the BMI is the Book Manufacturers Institute, which covers its membership is largely printers and paper suppliers in the North American market, and was in many ways the starting point for the checklist we're talking about in part today, because it was a conversation at a BMI meeting where a number of manufacturers made the point you just made, that they were being asked multiple things in different ways, and they were looking for some sense of standardization. So maybe the next step in part there is for us to take this. We didn't get a lot of feedback from the BMI membership when we put the checklist out, but maybe this is an opportunity to come back and have that conversation and see how we can turn theory into practice. A question that was specifically directed at you, AJ, with respect to the pulping example that you gave. Just asking the question, how do you find the data around pulping if the printer isn't doing it? It's really not the printer, but the paper manufacturer isn't the one doing it. Do you seek out the company doing that work and collect it independently, or do you rely on the ultimate provider?
Yeah, so then you would have to go back to where are you sourcing your pulp from for your paper, and then now you're going to the pulp mills. So it is it's a long trail back to the starting point. It is does that answer your question? And would I personally do that? No, at this point I don't, because we just use our 100% post-consumer recycled paper. But the reason we're coming into this is because we're trying to build this tool that will work for all of the publishers and all of the papers, trying to make it as comprehensive as possible.
Sure, and I think that if it's not an integrated mill, they could report the impact of the source pulp as Scope 3 emissions, if they're doing a comprehensive report for you.
And a lot of what happens in these reports is you make assumptions, and so you would possibly make an assumption. I don't know how to do the math on this, but you would come up with an assumption that would be representative of the pulping process if you couldn't get the actual concrete data.
And one thing that has come in the chat that you may have seen, a question from Mark. Are you finding that customer requests, or in the case of Lakeside, Atlas's requests are similar, or are there major differences? Meaning that do you hear from consumers, EJ, that where they're asking questions that are different from the way that you focus on sustainability, or is your client base kind of aligned?
Our questions usually tend to be related to what we're already doing from customers. And then there's one below that, are we hearing directly from customers? We don't get a lot because it's pretty front and center on our website and things. So we don't get a lot of customers asking questions directly about what we're doing for sustainability.
Right.
Yeah, and as far as Atlas goes, we just provide basic data for them. It's very basic, what they want to do. Mostly what they do is they just want to know where we're going with it and what our plans and actions are.
Right. So it's really at a management or governance level.
It's a governance level.
The last question before I just ask you kind of a going out is from Rich, just asking, there are upcoming regulations in California around Scope 3 emissions. Are those impacting printer reporting efforts? This may be so specific that we don't have an answer today, but I'll turn to you, Dirk or Bryce. This is something that you're tracking.
I'll let Bryce see if she can tackle it. Yeah.
Congratulations, Bryce.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's in our near future to be following suit with what's happening in the US. So, I mean, Europe is ahead of the game too. So whatever's happening over there will probably eventually come over here. So.
And Dirk, do you currently have operations in California?
We don't. No, we don't. But then again, we've also had questions, I guess, if you think about it, if we have books that end up going to California and on other issues, we've always had to meet those requirements regardless of where the book goes. So they have those California requirements do factor in to how we manufacture the books and the type of materials we use. So fair question, Rich.
Yeah. And Prop 65 is an example of
exactly.
If I could just ask each of you to kind of leave us with a takeaway from your perspective, something that you think either this conversation or just your everyday work around sustainability leaves you with. They maybe start with you, EJ. What if you had advice for the publishers on the call? What would you tell them?
I think my first point of advice is to, if you're not already, try and get as Lakeside did, your benchmark starting point. Find out what are your emissions, what's your starting point, where are you at, and once you do that, it becomes a lot easier to pinpoint where you should take action. And I can tell you right now, it's going to be your paper. So even with us on 100% post-consumer recycled paper, it's something like 92% of our carbon emissions. And we fly, we transport, we use trucks, but it's the paper. So look to your paper, get your baselines. And also, I just want to say that the whole process of trying to standardize and get at least a basic starting point for the printers and for the publishers is a fantastic goal. And I have no doubt that it'll come together fairly quickly now that things are pointing in that direction.
Bryce, how about from your perspective? I mean, you're very much in the trenches and doing this every day. What would you say either to fellow manufacturers or to the publishers that you're working hard to support?
Yeah. If it's hard to tell where to start, just start tracking some data, whether it's just tracking your electric and natural gas usage to begin with, tracking your production. Those are good starting points, and just keep on adding to that. Make sure you have a team. That's very helpful to determine from the start who's going to be answering all of these questions. Get HR involved, get legal involved, get shipping involved, anyone else who might need to be. There's a lot of safety questions on there, quality. So create that team and just start tracking your data.
And Dirk, how about from you? What's your takeaway for today?
Yeah, I guess I would say, first off, Brian, I would say thanks for letting us be part of this. And it's great getting out and
pleasure.
in front of the group and chatting about an important subject like this. I guess my takeaway is, and hopefully you've heard, I think many printers and publishers are in the same position, and we need to work together. Yeah, I think working together will make things go smoother. And EJ, like I said, the experience you had, I know some of our customers had that with us. And that's what really resonates, is I think everybody's going through the same thing. So the more we can work together to help drive things, I think the better off we will all be.
And I think if I had a takeaway for this, although I'm just the moderator today, would be to test drive the Green Book Alliance's checklist, see how it works, and give us feedback on where it doesn't work for you or where you think it could be better. I generally have a rule of thumb that tools don't get better when they're not used. So, it's just the practice of that. You can provide feedback to info@greenbookalliance.org or to any of the constituent members, including me. And we'd love to have it. And Dirk, I'll definitely follow up with you and Matt Bear at BMI to see what we can do to kind of turn, as I said, theory into practice. Thank you very much, each of you, for being here today, spending your time with us. I know it's early in the day for you, EJ. And I really appreciate your commitment to this topic and being part of this conversation. We'll get a copy of this webinar, this recording, out to everyone who's registered, and you can look for that in the next week or so.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, my pleasure. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.